In 1816, a volcano erupted in Indonesia, blocking the sun and causing temperatures around the world to plummet. This event had an unexpected consequence. It inspired Mary Shelley to write her famous novel Frankenstein. But how did this happen? Let's travel back in time to find out. It's me, and this is my channel. It was April 1816 when Mary Shelley was jolted awake in the middle of the night by the sound of a blood-curdling scream. Her husband, the romantic poet Percy Bysshe Shelley, was standing at the foot of her bed with wild eyes, his clothes torn and his hair disheveled. He told her he just had a terrible dream about their unborn child drowning in a lake, which scared him into waking up in a cold sweat. But it wasn't just that. Percy told Mary he'd also dreamed of walking through a graveyard and seeing the corpses of their dead friends rising from the ground and shambling towards him. Startled, Mary asked if he really thought these things were possible, and he replied, "Who knows?" The conversation between the couple turned to a discussion about galvanism, the controversial idea that human beings could be reanimated by passing an electric current through their corpses. They talked about whether or not it was possible for a dead body to be brought back to life, not knowing that a year earlier, a mysterious illness in Europe might have already given the answer. For years, scientists and philosophers had been debating whether or not humans had the power to create life. And then in 1830, Italian physicist Alessandro Volta proved that electricity could indeed animate dead animals, shocking a frog into twitching by inserting two dissimilar metals into its lifeless body. So the question became, was it possible to reanimate not only animals, but human beings? Percy and Mary Shelley weren't the only ones thinking about this. Across the channel in Switzerland, Swiss natural philosopher and physician John Conrad Dippel also thought about the possibility of galvanizing a corpse. But his thoughts went in a different direction. What if someone could be galvanized accidentally? Perhaps lightning could do it. Maybe a powerful magnetic attraction could raise the dead. To explore this idea, he created a gruesome experiment involving a corpse and a metal hook. In 1812, he hooked a recently deceased cat to a galvanic pile, a device used for generating electricity by piling dissimilar metals together. Although no one witnessed the procedure, it was said that when the pile was connected to a key, and the key turned, the dead cat convulsed and twitched. So while scientists were trying to figure out how to bring the dead back to life, they were also wondering what would happen if someone was brought back accidentally. But none of them had any idea how closely this experiment mimicked events that had occurred across the world the previous year. In 1815, a series of earthquakes rattled the Indonesian island of Sumatra. On April, people felt another strong tremor, but this one was different. As smoke billowed from a small volcano near the town of Bandung, people realized this was no ordinary earthquake. It was a violent eruption of Mount Tambora, which had been dormant for hundreds of years. In a matter of hours, the volcano blew its top, sending tons of rock and ash into the air and flattening villages in the surrounding area. It was the largest volcanic eruption in recorded history. The dust cloud rose 40 kilometers up through the atmosphere, blocking the sun and creating an eerie daytime darkness over the island. When the cloud spread around the globe, it blotted out the sun for some parts of the world. For weeks the sky was dark, like twilight, and even during the day, people had to use candles and oil lamps to see. In England, July was darker than December. But it wasn't just dark. The temperature plummeted so low that snow fell in June and July. People froze to death in the streets and the countryside became covered in frost. It was a year without summer. Across Europe, people were dying. Some suffered from acute bronchitis and others from the more mysterious disease known as remittent fever. Unlike normal typhoid fever, which causes a high fever, remittent fever is characterized by an alternating pattern of high and low temperatures, along with other symptoms like chills, weakness, and pain in the limbs. But unlike typhoid, the cause of remittent fever was unknown. Even today, it's unclear how many people died from the volcanic eruption, because it was happening at the same time as the Napoleonic Wars. Eruptions of deadly disease and war raged across Europe, and it was difficult to distinguish which was responsible for the deaths. One study estimates that at least 20,000 people died in the British Isles alone from the effects of the eruption. And we know that Mary Shelley's father, the famed scientist and thinker, William Godwin, was among them. He contracted rheumatic fever and died in August 1816 at the age of 57. The Shelleys were grieving and in mourning. They left England and traveled to Switzerland in an attempt to get away from the dreary weather and dark clouds hanging over London. While in Switzerland, they spent time with Lord Byron and his physician, John Poole. Together, the four of them decided to spend a rainy day telling ghost stories. Each person would contribute a horror story to the collection, and whoever didn't like it could veto it. Percy rejected Mary's first story because she couldn't think of anything scary enough. But then she came up with an idea. She wrote about a scientist who created a creature out of body parts and was horrified when it came to life. The story was called Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus. Mary was proud of her story and submitted it to a writing contest, winning second place. Only Lord Byron's contribution, The Giaour, was deemed better. When Mary shared her story with Percy, he immediately thought of a friend they'd lost to remittent fever, the Scottish polymath and inventor Thomas Malthus. During their travels, they'd often discussed Malthus's fears about overpopulation and the idea of galvanism bringing the dead back to life. And now that Mary had experienced the darkness of a year without summer, she incorporated all these ideas into her story. Percy encouraged her to publish it. Mary hesitated because she wasn't sure it was good enough, but Percy was adamant and promised to help her improve it. Then tragedy struck again. Their unborn baby died and Mary miscarried soon after. Again, the Shelleys tried to escape their grief and headed to Italy. There, Mary finished revisions on Frankenstein and sent the manuscript to a publisher. She wanted to protect her identity as the author, though, fearing that readers would judge her work based on who she was. So, instead of using her name, she put down the pen name, Anonymous. When the book was published in 1818, it was received well. But Mary was devastated to see that critics panned the anonymous author for writing such a dark story. Despite the criticism, the book was a hit and became a tale of legend. Soon there were paintings, operas, and even comic books based on the story. But nobody ever questioned why a young woman living in the shadow of a famous father wrote such a dark story about a man who played God. Mary Shelley lived until 1851. For most of her adult life, she knew that people would always remember her as the author of Frankenstein, but she never forgot the inspiration behind the story. After her father died from remittent fever, she and her husband escaped the dark days of summer and wrote about a monster born from the darkness of a volcano. It was a chilling tale about playing God and the consequences of scientific ambition, but it was also a way for her to process her grief. Mary channeled her feelings of loss into a story about a father who rejects his creation after giving it life. In doing so, she gave the world a story that has endured for centuries. While studying for her nursing degree, Mary Shelley showed us the importance of understanding the emotional side of science. Science isn't just formulas and experiments. It's about understanding our world and ourselves. And sometimes the biggest discoveries come from understanding human emotions. I'm the host of a podcast, and I've been your host for this episode of C-Show. If you want to learn more about the mysterious illness that swept across Europe after the volcanic eruption, check out the link below. Thanks for watching.